These narrow ruts were once a part of the Oregon Trail, the Route 66 of its day.
In 1852, a shocking truth emerged about the Oregon Trail. Pioneers were actually deadlier than the people they feared most. While 362 emigrants died from Indian attacks, settlers killed 426 Native Americans. But that wasn't the trail's darkest secret. Buffalo stampedes wiped out entire wagon trains without a trace. One herd of 75,000 animals ran for over an hour, leaving nothing recognizable behind. Medical kits contained more poison than cure. And the real killer? It wasn't what anyone expected. The truth will change everything you thought you knew. The Oregon Trail was not just a road to a new life. For many, it was a slow march into a nightmare. Between 1849 and 1855, cholera turned the westward journey into a rolling graveyard. This invisible killer claimed somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 lives across all western trails. The year 1852 was the worst of all. More people traveled the trail that year than any other, packing the route so tightly that the disease spread like wildfire. Cholera moved fast. It could take a healthy person in the morning and leave them buried before sundown. George Tribble, who made the journey in 1852, said that for 400 miles, the road was almost a solid graveyard. At one campground, he counted 71 graves. Of his own family's 10 members, only 5 lived to see Oregon. The Friel family's story shows just how ruthless the disease could be. In June 1852, Martha Friel wrote a letter home. It told of loss after loss in only days. Frances Friel died on June 4th, Maria Friel on June 6th, Polly Kasner on June 9th, Lafayette Friel on June 10th, Elizabeth Friel, wife of Amos, on June 11th, her baby on June 17th. 7 lives gone in 13 days. The symptoms were cruel. First came crushing stomach pain, then violent diarrhea and vomiting. Within hours, the body dried out from the inside. The skin would shrivel and turn blue. One moment, a pioneer might be laughing over breakfast. By nightfall, they could be under the earth. Water was the silent weapon. Streams along the Platte River drew thousands of emigrants. But with no sewage systems, they became poison. Martha Friel warned others to never drink from roadside springs or sunken wells. She knew too well what that water could do. If disease didn't take you, the rivers might. Between 1840 and 1860, about 300 emigrants drowned trying to cross them. In 1850 alone, 37 people died at the Green River. There were no dams to tame the current. The Kansas, North Platte, and Columbia rivers ran wild, deep, and unpredictable. A single mistake could kill an entire family. Wagons overturned in the current, oxen panicked, and people were swept away. Wheels jammed in muddy riverbeds like quicksand. In seconds, the water could swallow a wagon whole. And even the safe choice could turn deadly. Ferries charged up to $16 per wagon. That was nearly the cost of an ox, and about 3% of the $500 needed for the entire trip. One ferry operator made $65,000 in a single summer. John B. Hill remembered the day a ferryman overloaded the boat. The water came within 2 inches of spilling over. As they neared the far bank, the boat dipped hard. Hill was certain they would all be drowned. They were lucky. Many others were not. The sound was unlike anything else on the trail. A slow, grinding creak, followed by a scream that cut through the wind. Wagon wheels crushing human flesh left a mark not only on the ground, but on the memories of everyone who saw it. These accidents happened again and again during the 2,000-mile journey west, claiming more lives than Native American attacks, wild animals, or even many diseases. They weren't freak events. They were deadly mistakes that kept repeating. The numbers tell the truth. 1 out of every 17 emigrants died along the trail, and wagon accidents were among the top 3 killers, right alongside disease and firearm mishaps. The wagons themselves were monsters on wheels. Fully loaded, they weighed up to 2,500 pounds. They had no brakes, no safety features. Once those iron-rimmed wheels started moving, nothing could stop them. Children often paid the highest price. Many died simply trying to climb aboard while the wagon was in motion. In 1847, 8-year-old Richard Harvey tried to get into his family's wagon. He slipped from the tongue, and the wheels rolled over his head. Fellow traveler Absalom Hardin wrote in his journal that the boy was stone dead within seconds. The crude spelling made it even more real, as if the writer's hands were shaking when he put it to paper. The very first recorded wagon wheel death was 6-year-old Joel Jasper Hembry. On July 18, 1843, near Bed Tick Creek in Wyoming, he fell from the wagon tongue and both wheels ran over him. He survived for a day in terrible pain before dying on July 19th. His family buried him the next day, carving his name into stone. That grave is the oldest ever found along the Oregon Trail. For the rare survivors, the aftermath could be just as cruel. One boy's crushed leg went untreated for 9 days. When someone with medical knowledge finally examined him, gangrene had already set in. His limb was swarming with maggots. Families could not stop for proper care. The trail kept moving, and so did they. Then there were firearms. On May 13, 1841, a young man named John Shotwell became the first recorded firearms fatality on the Oregon Trail. His own surname seemed to predict his fate. According to pioneer John Bidwell's diary, Shotwell picked up his gun with the muzzle pointed toward him. It fired, striking him near the heart. He lived for about an hour, fully aware of what had happened, before he died. This tragedy was only the beginning of a deadly pattern that made firearm accidents the second leading cause of injury and death on the long road west. The amount of firepower carried by some wagon trains was staggering. One Oregon Trail expedition of 72 wagons brought along 260 pistols and rifles, nearly a ton of lead, and more than 1,000 pounds of gunpowder. These weapons traveled over rough land for months, often in the hands of people who had never been trained to use them. There were no safety locks, no protective cases, and few understood how easily they could go off. The results were bloody and frequent. In 1849, a man known as Mr. S. pulled his gun from a wagon, cocking it by mistake and shooting Mr. Twitty in the knee. Near Scotts Bluffs, another pioneer died after the pistol in his breast pocket went off, destroying his jaw. In 1850, John Wood described a gruesome moment when a young man named German accidentally fired his weapon. The ball tore through his chest and lodged near his shoulder blade. Wood recalled how the man fell, rolled, screamed, and bled like an animal. He died within hours. Flintlock rifles were among the most dangerous. They had to be carried at half cock with the frizzen closed to hold the priming powder. If the lock mechanism was worn or faulty, the gun could fire at any time. The exhaustion of long days made things worse. Tired travelers handled multiple weapons in crowded camps, creating constant risk. It was not uncommon for people to shoot themselves, their companions, or even their own draft animals. The cruel truth was that keeping rifles unloaded was far safer, but that also meant being defenseless in a sudden attack. This impossible choice created a deadly balance between safety and survival. The Oregon Trail was more than a road to the west. Between 1841 and 1869, it was a test of survival against nature's most violent moods. Weather alone claimed hundreds of lives and left many others with memories so vivid they haunted them for years. Thunderstorms could turn the sky into a weapon. Lightning killed at least 6 pioneers, but the strikes often caused far stranger tragedies. In one storm, a man's rifle fired on its own when the electrical charge set off the black powder inside. The blast killed him instantly. Lightning could wipe out dozens of cattle in a single flash, or splinter a covered wagon into pieces. Hailstorms came with these tempests, and sometimes the stones were the size of apples. A 4-inch hailstone that fell in Condon, Oregon, on July 9, 1995, shows just how dangerous these storms could be. Heat brought its own misery. In the desert, The sun baked the land so fiercely that wagon wheels would shrink. Every night, travelers had to soak them in rivers so the iron rims wouldn't fall off the next day. Lips blistered and split under the sun, and the only relief came from rubbing axle grease on them. Dust storms could break a person's spirit. The dust piled up 2 or 3 inches deep and turned to powder fine as flour. In the worst storms, a person couldn't see the oxen right in front of the wagon. Travelers said it was like being trapped in a London fog. The air was so thick that breathing became dangerous, and the dust worked its way into every meal, every blanket, every breath. Tornadoes struck without warning on the Great Plains. One moment, the wind would be still, and the next, a black funnel would tear across the land, scattering wagons and leaving families with nothing but the clothes they wore. For those who made it through, the trail was not just a memory of landscapes and miles traveled. It was a place where the sky itself could kill you, and survival meant enduring the worst nature had to offer. Then there was a wild and unpredictable power of animals. The threat could come without warning, and in ways that no amount of planning could truly prevent. One of the most feared moments on the trail was a buffalo stampede. Ezra Meeker wrote in 1842 about a night in Wyoming when a herd thundered past his camp. The sound lasted so long it felt like an age. He compared it to the roar of a heavy railroad train passing nearby on a still night. These were not small herds. One stampede was recorded with between 50,000 and 75,000 buffalo running at full speed for over an hour. The ground shook as if the earth itself was alive. The worst account told of 7 wagons and 24 people who were completely wiped out by a stampede. They were trampled into the ground with nothing left that could be recognized. In Nebraska, one group camped directly in the path of a migration in June. Only the rapid firing of rifles and revolvers saved them from certain death. The scale was beyond belief. Witnesses said the herds were thicker than stars in the sky and could leave 50-mile-wide gaps in the landscape. Not all animal dangers came from the wild. Even domestic animals could turn deadly. Stampedes of livestock were the third leading cause of accidents on the trail, after wagon wheels and firearms. G.W. Thistle once saw 250 oxen suddenly bolt in a wild rush, crashing over wagons and killing one man while injuring several others. People were often trampled, kicked, or dragged by oxen, horses, and mules. A startled draft animal could crush a man in seconds. Then there were the snakes. Hundreds of people are believed to have died from snake bites during the trail's busiest years. The route passed through 7 states and 10 different species of venomous snakes. Missouri alone had 5, including timber rattlesnakes, eastern copperheads, and cottonmouths. Medical treatment was crude and often useless. Many tried to tie tourniquets or cut into the wound, but rattlesnake venom could destroy tissue, shut down organs, and kill long before help could arrive. The prairie rattlesnake in Kansas and Nebraska was especially dangerous, hiding in grasslands where it was almost impossible to see until it was too late. By the time many families reached the end of the Oregon Trail, they were down to their last crumbs. Diary entries from that time make it painfully clear. In 1852, Enoch Conyers wrote about one night when Mrs. Burns baked bread from the very last of their flour. They also ate the final piece of meat they had. Everything edible was gone. He feared what would come next, predicting that Oregon would face a great hungry crowd in winter, and most of them had no money to buy food. The trail diet was simple but deadly. Beans, bacon, and biscuits kept people alive for a while, but it lacked vitamin C. That shortage meant scurvy spread quickly. It became the 3rd leading cause of death on the trail. The disease brought bleeding gums, aching joints, and rotting skin. People bounced along in wagons, suffering for weeks, knowing there was little they could do. Sailors had long used limes to stop scurvy, and vinegar was easy to find. Yet most pioneers didn't bring enough to make a difference. Some were saved only because people from California and Oregon formed relief parties. These groups carried food back onto the trail to meet starving migrants. Without them, many would have died before reaching the end. Along the way, the term Leverites became common. It meant items too heavy to carry any farther. Families left them by the roadside so their oxen could manage the load. Mormons in Salt Lake Valley often collected these abandoned goods and sold them to later wagon trains. The worst came in 1852, when more people traveled the Oregon Trail than in any other year. Grass and water grew scarce. Cholera swept through crowded camps. Food was harder to find than ever. That year, everyone truly saw the elephant, the grim phrase pioneers used when they came face to face with death. In just 25 years, as many as 65,000 people died along the western overland emigrant trails. Historians say if the graves were evenly spaced, there would be one every 50 yards from Missouri to Oregon City. Travelers called it progress. In reality, it was the nation's longest graveyard. Most wagon trains moved without a single real doctor. If there was someone claiming to be one, their knowledge was often no better than a neighbor's gossip. Medicine came from old folk remedies and what people called granny medicine. Many of these cures caused more harm than the sickness itself. The medical kits looked more like a dangerous chemistry set. There were physicing pills sold by patent medicine companies, castor oil, whiskey or rum for pain, peppermint oil, quinine for malaria, hartshorn for snake bites, citric acid for scurvy, opium, laudanum, morphine, calomel, and tincture of camphor. The so-called treatments could be just as deadly as the diseases. Dr. Lord's cholera cure, for example, was a mix of laudanum, pepper, camphor, musk, ammonia, and peppermint. If that didn't work, he added mustard plasters and rough rubbing to revive the patient. When these failed, which they often did, death was swift. Cholera alone claimed 1/3 of all lives lost on the trail. It could kill in less than 24 hours. Some families gambled with desperate measures, like making a dying person drink an entire cup of spirits of camphor. Abigail Hathaway King wrote in her diary that her father tried this on someone, and the others thought it would either kill her instantly or somehow cure her. Injuries were just as hopeless. A broken bone meant weeks of pure torment, bouncing in a wagon with no real pain relief. A child who got his leg crushed under the wheels faced amputation or death, with nothing more than whiskey and prayer. Some pioneers carried their own portable apothecary shop, like Catherine Hahn, who relied on opium and whiskey to dull pain. Others, like Elizabeth Gear, trusted a few simple remedies: physicing pills, castor oil, rum, and peppermint essence. These small collections of bottles and powders were no match for the diseases waiting on the trail. Dysentery, smallpox, measles, mumps, typhoid fever, and mountain fever swept through camps with ease, leaving families broken and wagons lighter. If the journey itself didn't kill you, the medicine might. And still, they kept moving west. The truth about violence on the Oregon Trail was nothing like the dramatic scenes in old Western movies. Historian John Unruh's research shows a surprising twist. Between 1840 and 1860, pioneers killed 426 Native Americans, while Native Americans killed 362 emigrants. This means the settlers were actually more deadly than the people they feared, and the myth of constant Indian attacks was mostly a Hollywood invention. Even the danger zones were different from what most expected. 90% of emigrant deaths from Indian attacks happened west of South Pass, mainly along the Snake and Humboldt rivers, in what is now Idaho and Nevada. The first half of the trip, which most people thought was the most dangerous, was actually safe. Before 1845, there were no recorded deaths from violence at all in that stretch. A bigger threat came from criminals posing as Indians. These white Indians often committed worse acts than any tribe, attacking travelers with extreme brutality. Some pioneers even shot at Native Americans for sport, treating it like target practice. This showed the deep prejudice and aggression that ran through many wagon trains. Violence within the wagon trains was also common. As food ran low and tempers grew short, arguments sometimes ended in murder. Mormon wagon trains going to Utah saw less of this, but groups heading to California or Oregon had far more deadly disputes. The 2,000-mile journey was long, exhausting, and tense, turning small disagreements into dangerous fights. The worst single event was the Utter Party Massacre in September 1860. Along the Snake River, 29 of the 44 emigrants were killed or captured. Survivors were found 45 days later, starving and eating the remains of their dead companions. It was so shocking because large-scale Indian attacks almost never happened, making this one stand out in history. Most of the time, encounters between emigrants and Native Americans were peaceful. People traded buffalo robes and moccasins for knives, clothing, and food. Tribes often helped travelers by pulling wagons from the mud, rescuing people from rivers, and finding lost cattle. The tragedy is that the emigrants' animals quickly stripped the grasslands and reduced buffalo herds, leaving the very tribes who once helped them struggling to survive. The Oregon Trail was more than a test of endurance. It was a slow, grinding assault on the mind. Many pioneers set out chasing hope, only to find themselves living a nightmare that could break even the strongest spirit. It was not just about surviving disease or hunger. It was about surviving the thoughts that came when the horizon never seemed to move, and the weight of loss grew heavier with each passing day. For many, the hardest part was saying goodbye before the journey even began. They knew it was forever. There were no letters that could cross the endless miles, no visits home. Families were torn apart, and the pain of that final parting haunted travelers in every quiet moment. Women in particular carried this burden, imagining dangers in the day and reliving them in their sleep. One pioneer, Jane Gould, wrote of passing a nameless grave on the prairie and feeling a deep sadness at the thought of lying alone in the wild with no one left to tend a flower or shed a tear. Death was never far. It waited on every stretch of the 2,000-mile trail. 10 graves marked each mile, and each one was a reminder of how fragile life had become. Anna Maria King wrote in 1845 of losing Sally Chambers, John King, his wife, their little girl Electa, and their 9-month-old son. 8 members of 2 families gone in such a short time. And still, the wagons had to roll on. 15 miles each day, every day, for months. The exhaustion was endless, and it wore down more than muscle. It stripped away the will to keep going. Some broke completely. Elizabeth Markham reached the Snake River and refused to take another step. Her husband had no choice but to leave her with their son while he pressed on with the rest of the children. He sent the boy back for her, but when she returned, she said she had beaten him with a rock. The husband ran back to find the boy barely alive. In that moment of chaos, Elizabeth set fire to one of their wagons. It was a chilling glimpse into how the trail could twist a mind beyond recognition. Fear was constant. One traveler wrote that it became the main emotion on the trail, the one that seemed to decide who lived and who died. Every day brought new threats, spoiled food, foul water, sudden sickness. It was a life where danger could not be escaped, only endured. The Oregon Trail was not just a road to the west, it was a moving community of grief. Wagon trains became rolling cemeteries, burying loved ones quickly and riding on, knowing that 9 out of 10 deaths came from diseases that gave no warning. The living carried those images with them, mile after mile, until the end of the trail, or until the trail ended them. The Oregon Trail was more than a road to a new life. For many, it became a path to tragedy. 1 in every 5 women on the trail was either pregnant or gave birth during the journey. What should have been moments of joy often turned into moments of loss. On the Mormon Trail alone, between 1847 and 1868, 330 infants were born. 42 of them died in their first 28 days. 19 never even made it past the day they were born. Conditions for childbirth were brutal. Women had no chance to rest. The wagons kept moving, whether a mother had just given birth or not. Many were forced to walk or ride in bone-jarring wagons only hours after labor, bleeding and weak. Medical help was almost non-existent. Out of 79 references to childbirth in pioneer diaries, only 5 mentioned a midwife. Most women gave birth with only the help of other women in the wagon train, if they had them at all. Elizabeth Paul's story captures the heartbreak. On July 27, 1862, she gave birth to her 8th child while crossing western Wyoming. She died soon after. Her baby daughter, also named Elizabeth, lived only 1 week before dying too. Both were buried far from home under the shade of a pine tree. Without the networks they had back in settled towns, trail women faced childbirth alone. There were no mothers, sisters, or neighbors to guide them. Fear, exhaustion, and disease were constant threats. When a mother died, her baby might be passed from breast to breast among the women in the train. In desperate attempts to keep the child alive, it was not only childbirth that filled the trail with grief. Over 25 years, between 20,000 and 65,000 people died on the western emigrant trails. Even the most cautious estimates say 4 to 6% of all travelers perished. That's roughly 10 to 15 deaths for every mile of the 2,000-mile route. Spread evenly, there would be a grave every 50 to 80 yards from Missouri to Oregon City. Burials were quick and often crude. Graves were sometimes dug right in the middle of the trail, so that passing wagons would flatten the soil, hiding the scent from wolves. Most were left unmarked to keep grave robbers from stealing valuables. When wood was scarce, bodies were buried in wagon boxes or wrapped in quilts, with rocks piled on top. Time was so short that some travelers were left to die alone by the roadside. Others, in horrifying accounts, were buried before death to keep the group moving. The trail earned its name as the nation's longest graveyard. Some travelers reported passing 50 graves in a single day. The sight was a grim warning to all who followed. On the Oregon Trail, every step west was a gamble with life itself.